You may not understand it now, but I'm still going to plant this seed. This seed must grow regardless of the fact that it's planted in stone. We Black people will never liberate ourselves based upon a biblical fairy tale and a silly slave syndrome myth. When we formulate our liberation based upon a Bible written by our most ungodliest enemies and based upon a slave syndrome myth, which presents what would in fact be the least plausible method used for controlling generations of people, we are in fact making damn fools of ourselves. Furthermore, when we pass down those noted beliefs, those false beliefs down to our children, we're creating future generations of Black slaves for the white society. We can no longer continue like this. We must start functioning based upon reality if we are to ever liberate ourselves. The hidden reality is that when these segregation tactics used in the past for maintaining their white social dominance over Black people had become no longer socially acceptable with the changing times and had resulted in unprecedented Black protests, white oppressive forces developed more covert methods for continuing their subjugation of Black people. White oppressive forces now subjugates us without any Black resistance because nowadays, before we can even confront the system of white supremacy, we're forced to fight against many of our own people that they brainwashed to defend it. Most of us regards those Black people as merely being sellouts and traitors. But the truth of the matter is that those Black people have been deliberately socialized to be the Black bougie buffer class. The Black bougie buffer class are being used to undermine the demands of the Black population. Rather than fight for increased rights for the Black population, they work to maintain the white status quo. The term bougie is often associated with affluent Blacks. However, the mindset of the buffer class exists among Black people at all financial levels. Therefore, the term commonly used today are the Black buffer class. This Black buffer class is comprised of a segment of the Black population that have been socialized to revere Caucasians, and they have been so heavily demoralized by the white society's negative depictions of our racial group that they've internalized those falsehoods and have become contemptuous towards their own racial group. And they now fiercely fight to defend the white society. Here are 3 things to know about the buffer class. 1, they're protectors of the white status quo. 2, their mission is to neutralize Black dissent. 3, they work to keep the collective aggressions of the Black masses shifted away from the white society and redirected against our own people. They are the gatekeepers of the Black community. White social scientists also determined a long time ago that the Black masses could be made easier to control by perpetually negatively distorting what we believe about ourselves. People are easily controlled by the narratives they routinely receive about themselves. It doesn't matter if the narratives are untrue. All that matters is that the people believe that the narratives are true. When people are constantly subjected to receiving only the fraudulent, worst negative narratives about themselves, they become demoralized, divided, self-loathing, and it shifts their collective aggressions away from their oppressors and it redirects it towards themselves. When people are kept within this condition, they can then be ruled over forever. This is what's being done to the Black population by the white society. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of the Black population that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality is much more than just biased media reporting. It is actually an elaborate Black racially demoralizing, divide and rule psychological warfare campaign. Demoralize, divide and rule is a method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hate and division between them. This is not some silly conspiracy theory. It's a well-proven psychological warfare tactic used for controlling targeted populations. And it's so obvious that it's only by not critically thinking that it cannot be seen. For when critically thinking, it becomes clear to see just how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually is that all narratives that Black people receive about ourselves from the white society are consistently negative and Black racially demoralizing. It is clearly a Black racially demoralizing divide and rule psychological warfare campaign. The white society exclusively writes all Black societal narratives, statistics, study results, and they even control our mainstream media images. The white society therefore literally owns Black people's interpretation of our collective state. If you don't think that they're exploiting this scenario to garner an outcome among us that benefits themselves, you are extremely naive. This demoralized divide and rule warfare tactic is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects Black people to receiving only the fraudulent and worse narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent Black racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of the Black population without being challenged or counterbalanced by an equal amount of Black positive racially affirming information. It conveys a subliminal message that Black people are now our own worst enemies and that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that Black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when Black people are repetitively presented these noted narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its subliminal programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. With time, being unable to refute the constant negative disinformation being told about ourselves, many Black people eventually comes to accept it, thus creating division and self-hatred among us. This warfare tactic works by tapping into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave millions of Black people. Here's something else I want you to critically consider. Have you ever considered just how unnatural it is that millions of Black people are now more afraid of our own people than we are of Caucasians, given the evil history shared between us and Caucasians? Think about that. This insanity exists because they've also brainwashed many of us to fear our own people. Through their exaggerated Black on Black propaganda campaign, the white ruling elites brainwash us to fear our own people. The white ruling powers realize that a fearful Black population is much easier to control than a fearless one. Fear is one of the most powerful human emotions, and it can be used as a tool for controlling targeted populations. Oppressive governments often maintains their grip over a targeted group by continually invoking fear within them and then proceeding to claim that only they, the ruling powers, have the means to protect the targeted population from the threat. The white society manipulated millions of Black people to fear our own people and to believe that we need the white society to protect us from our own people. Fear within a targeted population are often consequences of narratives created by those in positions of power. Ruling classes for many years have understood the power of intentionally invoking fear in their subordinate populations as a means of social control. Social scientists calls it fear psychosis. Through the skillful, sustained use of repetitive propaganda campaigns, white oppressive forces have created a psychological prison for the minds of millions of Black people. Those Black people who do not critically think never notices their mental change. This psychological system provides the white society with a more proficient method used for controlling Black populations, because it not only makes Black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in fact makes many Black people even prefer it. It is at the root of both the profound division and self-hatred now afflicting so many Black people. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is give them certain information and you can persuade an entire generation towards an applied objective. It is time for us to wake up to the reality of what's being done to us. It is time. The time of believing in silly biblical fairy tales is over. Willie Lynch is over. We have to realize that there are social sciences. The white society uses its monopoly over information that's fed into our minds to mentally enslave us. It is the reality that we must awaken. To our detriment, the oppressed will always believe the fraudulent words about themselves. Frantz Fanon said that. Brothers and sisters, it is time to wake up to our reality. The time of believing in dumb shit is over. It has now been more than 400 years since the first slaves were brought to America. If, after all these years, you're now walking around with a computer in your pocket with access to unlimited information, and your best assessments is that our condition is connected to a Bible written by our most ungodliest enemies and brutally beaten into the minds of our ancestors, or you believe our condition is connected to a slave syndrome, you should be a goddamn shame of yourself. And our ancestors weep for your broken mind. It's time to wake up.